Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Australia at Home. To finish off our week, we'll just pause for a second or two just as everyone comes into our session. We'll have a pretty decent one today because I think we've got a really interesting topic at hand. Great. I guess I just wanted to start by first acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, or at least where I'm broadcasting from. I imagine that many of you are on other lands. For me, that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And if you'll forgive me the opportunity to monologue a little bit, I feel like it's unkind to acknowledge country and not acknowledge also what else is happening in Australia and the world at the moment. With so many of our minds captured and so much of our attention captured by the Black Lives Matter protests in the US, I think it's important to remember that this is an enormous problem in Australia as well. In the things I've been reflecting on a lot in the last couple of days is that, you know, in 1991, when I was only 3 years old, the Hawke government held a royal commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. And since then, 420 people have, Indigenous people have died while under police care. That's 14 deaths per year, more than one a month. And that's happened every month for 30 years, almost my entire life. Well, it's definitely been happening for more than my entire life. And don't forget, this is the 30 years since the Royal Commission was established to ensure that it didn't happen again. And as we've seen more recently, Royal Commissions are a really powerful tool, ordinarily, to change system-wide behaviour. And I think it says a lot about just how ingrained and how structural the causes of this problem are. So it's not the topic we came here to join each other to talk about, but I did think it was really important to really put that at the front of our minds. And I guess my action for you today is to go to your local Aboriginal legal service. The Aboriginal Legal Service of New South Wales and ACT is mine, and you know, offer them what you can, ideally money. But at the very least, you know, anything you can to kind of contribute to solving that. But to move on to slightly more, you know, the things we came here to discuss. My name is Daniel Stone. I'm the Executive Director of Principal Co, which is a progressive kind of campaigns and advocacy agency that works with organisations to make them more effective and impactful with their advocacy. And when COVID first started, which, you know, we need to keep remembering that happened too. We, along with a number of other organisations, namely The Guardian, the Centre for Australian Progress, Essential Media, the Community Council for Australia, and the Australian Climate Foundation, pulled together to create Australia at Home, which is the sort of platform you're joining us in now. It's designed to be a meeting place for civil society to get us thinking about bigger topics and into the longer term. Please check out the other events that we've held at australiaathome.com.au. There's videos of all of them. They've been really, really interesting. And I think they hold up even if you can't participate in them live, but also do look at the things we're holding in the coming weeks as well so that you can participate in them. The segue there is into some of the ground rules for today. We do really want this to be as participatory as possible. It's really great when people start to pose questions and we get some conversation going backwards and forwards. So, you know, do please use the chat, jump in there, pose your questions, thoughts and ideas. I'll do my best to kind of raise up really interesting points and direct them to our speakers throughout the conversation. We're also going to record these sessions to share later, as I kind of implied. So let us know if that's an issue for you. Either write to me or write to Ashfa, who's in the chat, and we can take that on board. We also really encourage you to keep your video on. If any of you have joined us before, you've probably heard me say this a bunch of times, but if you flick your video on and go to the gallery mode up in the top right-hand corner, it means we can all see each other and see where we're up to. Even if you're having lunch, even if you're looking out the window, that's fine. It's just nice to know there's another person at the other end of the line. So yeah, do that if you can. Now, on to today. So we've got a very interesting panel here coming together around the launch of a very interesting television series that's going to be starting on SBS, I think next week, which is Filthy, Rich and Homeless. We'll be joined by Skye Leckie, who's with us, who's the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne. So thank you for joining us, and also Arron Wood. And we've also got Jacob joining us as well, who's one of the producers of the program. And I might actually just start by throwing to each of you and doing something that we've done for most Australia at Home so far, which is just by starting with like an open question, which has kind of shifted a little bit given the nature of our world has shifted a little bit since we first started doing these series. But I might start with you, Skye. How are you feeling? What's on your mind at the moment? Are you feeling okay at the end of the week or down, or how are things going for you?
Hi, Daniel. Well, as you say, we are living in different times. And at the end of the week, I suppose, as like the end of every week, it's becoming sort of increasingly the norm that you really don't sort of, we're talking to each other like this. I'm not meeting my friends. I'm not necessarily doing my normal things that I do. I've moved down to the country out of the city, which makes it even probably a little bit more remote of what my normal day would be like. So I have felt a very big transformation since March of being removed from our normal things that we have got used to. But I'm adapting, and I think we all have done quite a good job of doing that.
That's great. How about you, Jacob? How are you feeling about everything?
Well, look, end of another week, very busy week. Production is very, very busy at the moment. Obviously excited about Filthy Rich and Homeless, which goes out next week on SBS. But in terms of the bigger picture, it's strange this time of sort of isolation. It probably gives you more thinking time. And as the world seemingly implodes around us at times, and particularly with what's going on in America, is sort of that pause for thought about where we're at in Australia, where we're at globally. At times a need for real leadership. And I think that's where I'm at. It's a shocking time, and it's strange because we're isolated from one another, and yet these enormous seismic communal things are happening. I think that's even more discombobulating than it otherwise would be. But certainly a time to reflect on how lucky some of us are, while we see what's happening elsewhere.
Absolutely. I think we often talk about the importance of leadership, but I think now is a moment where you can acutely feel its absence and how valuable it is. Arron, what about yourself? How are you feeling?
Well, I'm really excited about the series airing next week because it was filmed a year ago. So it feels like it's been such a long time to keep the confidentiality and wait for this huge surprise. But for me, there's probably a little bit more of a personal tinge to this week because both of my parents are in the vulnerable age group. So my dad's got some immuno issues and they're in their 70s. So for the first time since lockdown, they're coming down from Mildura and I will get to see them tonight. And so I'm extremely excited that that's going to happen. And my kids who are 6 and 3 are just bursting out of their skin. But I want to kind of come back to that sort of human connection there that's so important to us all. But as you've highlighted, Daniel and Jacob, I think what's going on around the world with what's happening in the US, with what's happening with our homeless, with what's happening with the protests, I think that what this has brought back to me is just how important that sense of community and that human connection, and probably the biggest thing for me is that sense of empathy, is that where is the sense of empathy? Why are we allowing some people in our society to be disrespected? So it's kind of like these huge seismic events, as Jacob said, but ultimately for me, they're starting to crystallize in what is a really simple thing. And that's just looking out for each other and trying to understand each other's position and beliefs and values.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess to kind of go back to the production process, Arron, I think with programs like this, one of the things I'm always fascinated about is, what did you go into it expecting and how did you come out of it feeling? Obviously there's probably some plot twists there that you don't necessarily or probably shouldn't touch on, but I am just kind of interested to know that, yeah, like what does that contrast look like? And especially now a year has passed, how has that experience shaped the way you've reflected on things?
Massively. So funnily enough, when I saw that Skye was going to be in this online chat, I was pretty excited, because there's a lot of reasons why I took part in the show, and most of all, it was about trying to understand, even for a small amount, what our city's most vulnerable are dealing with every day. But funnily enough, it was watching Skye in the second series and the way her story was treated, and then the emotional impact that I saw, Skye, when you broke down in tears when someone showed you a bit of kindness, that made me think, wow, there's something pretty special with this show. And it was funny because when I was going to do it, Jacob, of course, says, don't watch series 1 and 2. We want this to, and of course, so I went and watched series 1 and 2 straight away.
It's my job, it's my job.
Don't listen to you.
And I thought, this is such an amazing series in so many ways. It sparks a national conversation, but it does it in a way which I think is respectful to the participants, respectful to those experiencing homelessness, and that's a really fine line to walk. So I thought I knew what I was going to be in for, but what I can absolutely tell you is that watching that show, reading the stats, knowing the numbers, doesn't prepare you for the first night they drop you off in a city with nothing and they say, see you later. So what surprised me most was just how quick and in your face the impact of losing, all the things that you see as part of your life, how quickly that has impact.
Was there one thing in particular that really struck you at that moment? Like, what was the straw that broke the camel's back of realization, so to speak?
I think it's just that the city takes on a whole new feel. I've been to Sydney as a tourist. I've been to Sydney for work. I love it. It's a beautiful city. But when you are put in that position, even if it's only for a short period of time, and I'm at pains to say I'll never know what it's like to be homeless, because I'm not. But what this show does is give you as much as it can without you actually being homeless yourself. So I think the biggest thing for me was just that the city took on a completely different feel. It was scary, it was confusing, and within the space of 24 hours, a sense of hopelessness and lack of confidence in yourself starts to creep in. You're wearing clothes that you wouldn't normally wear. After a few days without a shower, I started to, take on a bit of a smell, and I could see people knew that. And then you're not part of the world. The world just goes on around you. People are sitting having a coffee 20 metres away, but you don't feel any kind of community or kinship with them because you're not part of that world. So that was probably the most stunning realisation, how quickly you can slip out of normal society.
Yeah. Skye, I might throw to you there. And I am curious to go back to the original question, which was what, what did you go into this experience expecting, and how do you feel like it's shaped you? But to more directly build off Arron's point at the end, which was, obviously you are from Sydney. Like, was it a different experience to be in places you've had dinner, where you've spent time with friends, where you've got all these kind of lived memories, and then be forced to experience that space in a really different way? Like, what was that?
Because it is my city, so I know it pretty well. I've lived and worked in the city for all my life. So I thought, when I was dumped out at Parramatta, which is not a place that I'm very sort of au fait with, that same feeling that Arron described, when they just, you're there, it's your city, but you're foreign, and the world started to unravel. Everything became unpredictable. The fact that I had no water. For instance, I wear glasses. They took my glasses away, so I couldn't see, distances. I didn't know quite where the next meal was going to come from. I mean, you sort of, after the first night, you start to prioritize, I guess, what the most important things are and how you're going to deal with getting those things right in your city. And I knew then that I had to get out of Parramatta I knew that if I could get back possibly into the city of Sydney, which is where I'd worked and I'd lived, that I felt safe. So I was always looking for new measures to try and gain back some of what had been taken away from me, because absolutely I was stripped bare and it was terrifying. So I just thought, you know, as I said, to try and prioritize what I needed to do to survive, and what I needed to do was get back to a place that I felt that was remotely showing me some sort of comfort.
And when you got there, did you feel like you achieved it?
That I was cheating?
Oh, no. When you got there, did you feel like you had, that you got the comfort that you felt it would?
Yes, because I knew it like the back of my hand. I knew sort of, but the thing was, when I say about the unpredictability, I mean, what was my day? I wake up, I'm walking, but where am I walking to? What am I doing? I haven't got any money. It's not like I'm walking to a restaurant to have breakfast, or I'm then going to go on to lunch. That's the thing that took its toll on me in the first 48 hours of, I'd lost all purpose. So even though you tried to make a plan to keep on going, a plan for what though? What was I planning for?
Yeah.
Because, you know, like in a normal day, you get up and you do whatever you have to do, and boom, 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 and then you go to bed. But you achieve things along the way.
Yeah.
That was what really hit me, that I couldn't, I was just aimlessly, hopelessly lost.
Yeah. And I guess to go back to that original question, like, you know, what did you kind of go into the experience expecting? And now that, you know, a bit more time has passed for you, how has that changed some of the things?
Well, like Arron, we were told not to watch the show. And I turned on one, and I actually had to turn it off because I was absolutely thinking, what was I thinking? Why did I say I would do this? But the experience itself, because I had no real concept about what was happening out on the streets of the city I live in. Like a lot of people, you know, everyone's in a rush. You're walking down the street and there's someone there putting their hand out or asking you for something. You go, oh, you know, so busy thinking about me. Not thinking or understanding what has pushed this person here into this situation.
Yeah.
Because if you had the choice, you would never, ever put yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
But they've run out of favors, whether it's with their family or friends. They've hit hard times, and we know there's so many different reasons why they're there. But, you know, you just wouldn't put yourself there if you had another choice.
Yeah. Like, has it changed? And this is, I guess, an open question to both of you. Like, has it changed the way that you move through the city now? Like,
absolutely. I mean, it's changed so much of the way I think of everything.
Yeah. But what do you see that you didn't before? Like, how do you behave that you might not have before?
Well, the thing I missed was the compassion of my fellow countrymen who just looked at me, as like Arron said, I stunk. I was dirty. They sort of look at me and go, oh my God, I can't, that's so frightening. No one bothered to give me, you know, the care. So what I do now is just say, are you okay? Hi.
Yeah.
You know, it was that sort of personal touch that someone stopped to say, are you okay?
Yeah, I think we underestimate just having a talk to someone. It doesn't mean you're going to save the world or solve homelessness overnight, but that sense of just having a chat to them as a human being, as Skye said, I think we underestimate that. I think for me, one of the things that the show did was we actually have a homelessness advisory committee meeting quite regularly here at City of Melbourne, and we've got 5 people with lived experience of homelessness. And I couldn't say anything about the show because of all the confidentiality stuff. That's what Jacob does. He makes sure that it's in the vault. He's very good like that. But I was sitting in the meetings that I'd sat in before the show, and I could talk about, again, the sort of theoretical side of homelessness, and I could tell you all the reasons why people end up homeless, and I could talk about the numbers that we had on our streets. But it was the first time I sat in that meeting, and I think I really heard what the people with lived experience of homelessness were saying and why some of their reactions were the way they were. And so that, to me, felt like a real gift. And I think what it's done for me is I'm probably the most annoying person in the world to the salvos, because what I do is I walk the streets, and as soon as I see someone, I go and have a chat, and then I say, you know, are you on an accommodation list? Are you looking for housing? Can you get any help? And then I'm straight on the phone to Major Brendan Noddle and say, Brendan, I've got another person for you to see. So I'm speaking to him probably 5 or 6 times a day at the moment.
Yeah, wow. Fantastic, though. My next question, basically somebody managed to post in the chat. So rather than me taking the space, I might actually throw to you, Catherine Robinson, if you'd like to pose your question to Jacob.
Hi, Jacob.
Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Arron. Hi, Skye. Great to see you all again.
You too, Catherine.
I was just interested in kind of prompting Jacob to tell us more about why he made a series about homelessness. He makes television for a living, right? So why homelessness, and what sets this series apart from other work that you've done?
Great. For those of you that don't know her on this web chat, of course, Dr. Catherine Robinson is co-host of the show, and and a fantastic advocate for the series and for homelessness. Why did we do it? It goes back to that idea that as a company, Blackfella Films want to make programs that have a social purpose. We want to know why we're doing something. We're lucky. We can pick and choose our projects. Why homelessness in particular? We felt as a company that if it was being talked about, it wasn't being talked about enough. And when it was being talked about, it wasn't being talked about properly. Now, that's a general, I'm talking about, when I say that, I'm talking about the media. I'm talking about the thing that I'm a part of. And I think when you've got a subject that isn't being talked about enough or isn't being talked about well, for a program maker like me and for a company like Blackfella Films, it's a gift really. And it's actually a kind of almost a moral obligation to make a series about it. And so when you start researching that subject and you read the statistics, as Arron was saying, and you realize that despite announcements, it doesn't matter what side of politics they came from, but announcements that talked about ending this problem many years ago, and then you're looking at a graph of the numbers getting worse. Well, it's a good thing to make a program about. And if you can then start a national conversation, and SBS are very good at that with their series, and you can start changing hearts and minds, because I think going back to that purpose, I make no bones about the fact that we want to make program that is entertaining and that many people watch. That's a good thing. But it's important that if you have the right social purpose behind it and you can combine those two things, like a lot of people watching something that's important, that's the kind of perfect scenario. And so if you can come up with a format that works for the subject, then you can bring about attitudinal change. And attitudinal change about people, everyday Australians, people in positions of power, because we're all in this. You know, this isn't like, let's blame so-and-so, we all have a role in changing this. And the final thing was, for me, doing enough reading to honestly be able to say hand on heart that this is not an intractable problem. And that if there is a will, this can be solved. And it's quite exciting to get involved in a project where actually there are tangible outcomes if we put our minds to it. And that to me, that's a very compelling reason to making a program. I mean, we make programs where we don't have the answers, but it's also good to be involved with something where people can speak to them, and giving people who experience homelessness a platform to share their stories. I mean, I'm a bit old school. I'm from a journalistic background, and I was always taught that we're a conduit. It's not really about us. We're a conduit to give people who don't get to tell their stories a platform to tell them. And I still hold really dear to that. And I think this series does that, because as wonderful as these two guys are and all the people who've taken part, they are absolutely, just listening to them speak then, honestly, it was just brilliant. The show is actually a way of giving people experiencing homelessness a voice, both in the show and in a bigger sense. That's a really long answer.
But a fantastic one though. Thank you. I think like one thing I wanted to probe on a little bit there is You mentioned some of the impacts you hope the show will have, which is, particularly around awareness and a greater sense of empathy. Obviously from my sort of background, I work with a lot of sort of change-ish campaigns, and I think one of the things I'm always looking for is what's the will change a behavior, or what is the thing you can ask for? Is there something like that? Like, are there some proposals that, and it might even, based on Catherine, your background, happy if you want to contribute to this too. But what are the things we can materially do? Like, once you've got the empathy and it's still terrible, like we've got to be able to do something to solve this. What do you think that looks like?
That's probably more a question. I mean, I'll just answer one point maybe that leads into it. It's interesting that, because people question, well, what is the impact of this? Without getting all cerebral about it, we don't know the ripple effect of making programs normally. We make them because it's our role in a pluralistic democracy to make programs that kickstart conversations. But every now and then you get to involve yourself in a project where there are seemingly tangible outcomes. And the research that's been done into this series over the years has proved that there is attitudinal change that comes about. 2 out of 3 people who watched season 2, for example, then they either change, they said in response to surveys, they changed their attitude towards people experiencing homelessness. They donated food, they donated clothing, they volunteered to help people experiencing homelessness. And it's actually quite rare that television, without blowing our trumpet too hard, it's pretty rare that television does that. Television is normally a vicarious escape for people sat on their backsides on the couch.
Yes.
Which is great. But every now and then it makes you get off, you're behind and do something. And that's really, really exciting. So, I mean, I've listed a few things there, but I think there's a bigger thing, and Catherine, I'm sure, can speak to this, which is when you're talking about genuine attitudinal shift, because people are desperate to help, and Australians have proved that time and time again. Every crisis that happens, they want to help. But actually, there's bigger things here, because if you actually decide that there needs to be a will for systemic change, then the clue is in the problem of homelessness, i.e. not having a home. And that's where the conversation becomes most interesting, I would say. And Catherine knows a lot more about this than me. But I suppose in terms of tangible things, that's an obvious one.
Can I just, I want to just talk about some tangible things. And this is not, again, solving all issues, because I think Jacob's made it really clear that it's no one person that solves this issue. But what I've come to realise, and Catherine helped me with this a lot as well, is that a problem that I thought is just a fact of life and something that we need to accept in, cities and towns across the world is solvable. And so, the City of Melbourne's put an affordable housing strategy out, and I don't want this to sound like a shopping list, but when I came back from the show, what I did straight away was I want to do something that's actually tangible and real. So I got $500,000 I got for crisis accommodation at the Salvos. I got $430,000 for the night cafe, which helps our most vulnerable rough sleepers overnight get the services that they need. I secured the funding for street teams, which go out and literally meet with every rough sleeper in Melbourne and bring with them housing agencies. But the biggest thing I think is it changed my position about, what's called inclusionary zoning or mandatory targets for affordable housing. And that's become policy for City of Melbourne to advocate to the state government that the only way we solve this crisis is a huge social housing build and mandatory inclusionary zoning. And this is where it gets a little bit exciting, because I know in homelessness it can be a really disheartening and feeling any sense of hope is pretty difficult sometimes. But New Zealand's just announced that none of the rough sleepers that have gone into motel accommodation during COVID will go back on the streets. So they'll go from the motel accommodation into longer term housing. We're now pushing the state government in Victoria to make that same commitment, because during COVID, this terrible thing, we got 216 of people experiencing homelessness sleeping rough on the streets of Melbourne into motel accommodation. It's something that has never happened before in our city, but it's now that we've got to seize that opportunity to turn those shorter term things into long-term pathways out of homelessness. So I'm not naive enough to think that this is going to solve overnight, but I just feel like the time is now, and maybe this COVID crisis has been the thing that we needed to wake us up and say that this should not be acceptable in a country like Australia.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. And I think just to acknowledge a few things that have come up in the chat, Christy Wombat said, how do we feel about the government's handout for renovations and new buildings? That was definitely on my mind, reflecting on this conversation without any affordable housing mixed in there. And also I wanted to pull up Marty Beaumont's comment as well, that through COVID, we've learned that, dollars to fund housing and resources can solve homelessness. How can we keep the ball rolling with this into the future? And I think you've kind of touched on some approaches there. I do think, since we do have you, Catherine, I would love to kind of pose that policy question to you, if you don't mind. Although I will just say, if we're able to keep it a bit tight, because I realise we've got about 10 questions on stack and we're already halfway through our time.
Sure. Look, I mean, one thing I would add into that is that I don't think we are necessarily at the stage of empathy yet. I think that's always something that needs to be worked at. And part of me has responded to the kind of renovation grants as just kind of have been felt bewildered, I suppose. And for me, that kind of demonstrates that there is still a gap, that empathy is still needed, that the issue of homelessness still needs to be brought to the top in people's imagination of the world, imagination of Australia and what they want us to actually be as a nation and as a society. Also, I'd add that housing alone is not the answer. I think the emphasis on social housing is absolutely essential and critical. For some people, though, it's support as well as housing that's also needed. So it's investment in universal services, health services, mental health services, and also connecting people into community, supporting people to feel like they belong. Opening up our public spaces to be more accepting. So that makes the answers more complex, but this is a complex social issue. It still doesn't mean we can't answer it, but we need to look in an encompassing way at it. Thanks.
Thanks. That's really helpful, and a lot of enthusiasm for your comments in the chat. I guess on your point about empathy, which I think is a really strong one, I might bring it back to the experience of our two other wonderful guests here as well, and throw to Kathy, who has a question for you both.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. Kathy from Shelter, New South Wales. So, question for Skye and Arron. What was the most surprising thing you learned about the people you met on the street?
For me, it was their resilience to have been dealt the hand that they'd been dealt. I never found, there was no sort of necessary anger as, why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong? They just, it was sad because they accepted the situation that they had found themselves in. They felt completely alone because, as I said before, they'd used up all the favours that were given to them by family or friends. That hit rock bottom.
Kathy, I'm struggling because I learnt so many things, and I think probably for me the biggest impact was the time that I spent with people experiencing homelessness, and it was quite a raw emotional reaction for me with a few people that I met. And I think probably my biggest realisation was they're not them, they're us. And so it was, I think a lot of people, and it's a natural thing to feel sorry for someone. So you walk, I feel sorry for that person. I didn't feel sorry for them. I felt sorry for the position that they were in and the things that they'd had to deal with in their lives, but I actually just felt like they needed to be looked at as just people and not a label or a group. So the biggest realisation for me, I think, was that I didn't feel any real difference between myself and people experiencing homelessness, except the fact that I had a supportive family and a safety net and a roof over my head. I had these things, but we weren't any different as people. I think that was the big thing.
I guess looking back, I think both of you have touched on how your sense of self was really affected by the experience. And I might start with you, Arron, just because it was kind of following on from your comments. But did you? How long did it take to kind of reconnect with yourself afterwards? Like, even though it was only 10 days, a very brief experience, I imagine that, there was some, I can't think of another word other than just trauma, even though that, I don't want to, suggest it's more than people who've been living that way for years might have experienced. But I imagine it was an emotionally confronting experience. It took you a bit of time to process. What was coming out of it like?
Yeah, and you're exactly right, Daniel. This is where I'm always really mindful to say that it was a really confronting and full-on experience, but it pales into insignificance when you think about someone who hasn't just been homeless for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Some people experiencing long-term homelessness or cycling through where they get I think another big realisation for me was just how many opportunities and things are taken away from people who don't have much. So, it might start with abuse and then, then homelessness, and then they seek help and experience violence, in a sense of lining up in a line to try and get some food, or it just or someone treats them badly, or it's just constant. So for me, it pales into insignificance compared to what people experiencing homelessness are going through. But on a personal level, the emotion I went through was, I went talking about it now, it still comes back to me very quickly. And I think probably the biggest emotional thing for me, as I said, was when I spent a bit of time with someone experiencing homelessness down in Dapto outside of Wollongong, and we were thrown together as complete strangers. But by the end of it, we were sharing our deepest secrets with each other, and we've stayed in connection. We talk every week, and he's a really funny guy, and we'll be mates for life. So yeah, it was just a hugely emotional experience. I think that's probably my biggest apprehension now. I keep saying to myself, the issue is much bigger than me crying every 2 seconds on national television. But I'm prepared perhaps for some mates that I grew up with in country Victoria, perhaps saying you're a blubbering mess, but I'm okay with that.
It's worse things.
What about yourself, Skye?
Well, I actually, even though I was sort of obviously glad when it all ended, I still felt that I was like a square peg in a round hole. I slept that first weekend, I slept on the couch. I couldn't sleep in my bed because that's where I'd been either sleeping rough on the street or I'd been on someone's couch surfing. I didn't really want to communicate with other people. It had such a huge impact on me, the people that I met. And like Arron, I struck up friendships that I still are in contact with all of the people that I met on the street. And whether I can, in the beginning, I was sort of wanting financially to help them, but what I realized going forward is it's more what I mentioned before. It's about the personal relationship that we shared together, the secrets that we told each other, or the stories we told each other. That's what they actually want from me now. But the thing that I just wanted to bring up is that the way Blackfellas did the show, when people talk about homelessness, everybody just automatically thinks, oh, it's someone sleeping on the street. You can be, as I mentioned, the word couch surfing. you know, we started on the street with nothing. We then were buddied up with a person that had been living on the street. Then I went into a shelter where people actually you have a mattress, and you have a bed, and you have 3 meals a day, and you have a shower. Then I ended up with a young family out in Penrith. She had a roof over her head, but it wasn't her roof. She was at the behest of one of the fantastic NGOs that provide the housing for these sort of people. So it gave you such a big overview about what I'd always just considered homelessness as just that person lying in the corner at Central Station. So just to finish that off, it took me a long time to really get back into the world that I had, you know, left to do and come back to.
I think another question I wanted to touch on before we kind of get too close to time is back to you, Jacob. In a conversation that Jacob and I had before this session began, we're talking a bit about the production process, and you mentioned to me that you know, you're shooting 90 to 100 days worth of footage, like an enormous amount of footage. I'm also mindful that there's been a bit of criticism of the show as well. And I guess my thought is, obviously a lot of work and time goes into the way you try to put these people's stories forward. Obviously, we've heard from Skye and Arron about what it was like for them as people who were there in that moment and were there for every single hour on the street. But you know, you have the unenviable challenge of trying to condense that down into something that's kind of compelling and captures the essence of it for all of us at home. You know, what are some of the challenges that you faced there, and how did you approach them? You know, how do you make sure that the right moment's there, that it's not being exploitative, all of those kind of tensions?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, you're talking about, I mean, for anyone on the line who, I give a rough overview, for a normal documentary, just traditional, was that you would shoot 20 hours of rushes, so 20 hours of raw material, and that would become an hour's worth of television. On this production, we shoot somewhere about 250 hours for every hour that is ultimately broadcast. So you're right, there are a lot of choices to be made in that edit suite. I think it goes back to what I was saying before about what your starting point is, and why you're making the show, and you're constantly guided by that. I mean, these guys have been kind enough to state that we do try and take really good care of those guys, but we also have a huge duty of care and responsibility and ethical responsibility to the people in the show who are living with homelessness every day. And so it kind of goes back to that fundamental, call it what you will, journalistic training of is this an honest depiction of that person? Have we given them the opportunity and the platform to speak? And overall, does this series reflect a truth of what happened? And really, on one level, that's subjective. But if it's always driven by why you started out making it in the first place, I think you'll have that compass to guide you through. That's essentially how we do it. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. Some of the I'll talk about the criticism. I might as well just talk about it. I think sometimes when it's interesting when a show is criticized, because I think sometimes what happens in the media is you sort of get chucked into a genre. And I think that I make absolutely no bones about the fact that we decided to make a series that had a format which was potentially very engaging and that didn't preach to the converted and didn't preach to the choir. I've made documentaries that I'm really, really, really proud of about major social issues, and not many people have watched at times in my career. And I'm just as proud of those documentaries, but I want people to watch. And if that means that we invite wonderful people like these guys to take part in a show, and the part downside of that is that some criticism flies around, oh, it's reality TV, it's this and that and the other. But through that series, we get really strong messages across and give the platform to people experiencing homelessness and opportunities to speak and share their stories. Because frankly, I'm looking around and I don't see too many other avenues where 10, 15, 20 people experiencing homelessness have the opportunity to speak. I'm not flicking on too many channels seeing that. I'm not picking up too many newspapers and seeing that. And so that's what the show tried to create, an environment where that could happen. And obviously one of the things, again, because I'll take it straight on, is that, you hear phrases like poverty porn thrown around. And, I was a journalist, and there are lazy journalists out there. And the thing is, once a phrase like that starts doing the rounds, it sort of gets thrown at the wall in the hope it might stick, and it sort of gets branded around indiscriminately. And I think you actually need to people should give themselves a bit more credit and power of insight to actually analyze something properly and realize what it's actually doing, before they assume that it's doing something it isn't. And yeah, that's as I said, the show knows what it's trying to achieve. And actually, these two are the best advocates for it. Just listen to them talk, to be honest, about how they changed, how their attitudes changed, why they did it, how they feel afterwards, what are they going to do about it, what they've done about it, all the things that are sort of laid at the door of a series of criticism around, what does it matter anyway? What did they do? Why did they do the show? Well, the answers are all there when you listen to them.
Yeah. One thing that I feel like I'd be remiss not to ask, given we can, is Skye, as someone who has seen your series go to air, how do you feel? Do you feel like that was a good representation of your experience? And I'm sure there are things that weren't, but
but I was absolutely blown away by the amount of people that actually almost stopped me in the street, saying, what can I do? How can I help? My laptop went into meltdown once it went to air. And this has been so absolutely sort of encouraging, and backing up what Jacob's saying, is that the story was told to people who, like me, were ignorant about what was happening out there. It rose the level of this issue, which is, as we know, it is a tsunami. And we know that it's only going to get worse before it gets better. The fact that it's there and the fact that it's top of mind is the most important thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's been a lot of interest in the chat about policy solutions, and certainly where my mind goes as well. But I'm mindful that that's a big, complex topic that we probably can't get to the bottom of right here, right now. But I do want to bring
one thing, Daniel, I was just going to say though, and I won't list all the solutions, and because Catherine can list them all, a million times over. One thing I just want to say though is all the solutions are there. So yes. The most important part of this story is that we know what we need to do. We know all the multifaceted approaches that we need to take. We know that it has to be relationship first as well as housing first. It's just got to be done. That's the thing, is the solutions are there. It's just the will and the resources.
But could I also say that
absolutely.
The thing I found was, the right hand, when you lived on the street, the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. And what we need to do, we need to work out, and I'm with a group called the Act to End Street Sleeping, which is a government-backed new initiative. And what we're doing is collating. We've got collaboration with the government and with local council. We're collating data so we know what we are dealing with, because every single person out there is an individual, and their reason for there is different to the person next door. So we can keep throwing all this money, but I think, and it's been sort of proven, the money is being misdirected. There is money in the sector. We just need to know what we're actually dealing with. Is it abuse? Is it addiction? Is it mental health? All those issues are all ticked yes. But once we've got the data, we can start to hopefully implement and put them into some of them into housing with wraparound services. It's embryonic state beginnings, but it can be done.
And it's not a choice between being humanitarian and having compassion. And I know this will sound quite sort of brutal in just talking about the economics of this, but economics are important. That's what motivates some people. That's what motivates some levels of government. Is the economics on this are astounding. For every dollar you spend on housing someone, you save $3 on health presentations, on interactions with Victoria Police, on all sorts of other issues. So for every dollar spent on housing someone and getting them the right support that they need, you save $3. So it's not even an economic decision anymore. It's just, and I agree with Skye, I think the coordination is the hard piece, because there's so many people wanting to do good things in this space, and sometimes they're actually working against each other, or they're not doing something which is leading to a long-term outcome. So they may be actually perpetuating some of the issues. So I think the will is there. I think the people want, I think the everyday person wants action. It's really about that coordination and making sure that we're rowing all in the same direction.
Yeah, talking
Sort of
about
putting that
coordination, I think, sorry, I might just jump in to bring in another voice, which I think will be really interesting to contribute at this point. So Kate Colvin's with us as well, who's on the Council to Homeless People and also a member of the Everybody's Home campaign, which I think Andrea just put a link into in the chat very helpfully. But yeah, Kate, I might throw it to you. You know, you've obviously been doing a bit of work trying to bring all of these groups together. Like, you know, what are the challenges you face? What do you think the solutions and opportunities are? What does it look like from your perspective?
Oh, hi, thanks. I'm unmuted now, I think. Hi, everyone. Look, I think so many valuable perspectives there, and I really like what Catherine's saying about the need for support as well as housing. But I think part of the thing that, you know, Arron was really raising is that the amount of social housing is just not there. And we've had this sort of devastating outcome in the past week where, you know, despite there's all these cost-benefit analysis showing that investment in social housing is so important, and we've had the government needing to spend money on a stimulus, and yet they sort of still haven't come through. And I think one of the challenges there is that all of the arguments have been made to government, to the federal government, about the importance of social housing, but there's just still not the will there. So I think that the show is really important in kind of building that empathy. But for me, I suppose a question to the panel is, you know, how do we turn that empathy that people have and go beyond just what I agree is really important about showing respect and engaging and being relational with people who are homeless, but how do we go to that next step, which is putting pressure on government to make the change that's needed to invest in social housing and to invest in the kind of supports that Catherine's talking about, because it's just not there now. So I think Andrea's posted a link to the Everybody's Home campaign, which people are really welcome to connect with. But I guess I'd just be really interested to hear the panel talk about that issue about political change and what their view is about how we get that political change.
Is there a particular person you wanted to pose that to, Kate?
Oh, look, I mean, you know, possibly particularly Arron, because, you know, he's got such a unique role being deputy mayor and, you know, has played a really important role in the advocacy in the city of Melbourne. I know they've been good advocates trying to get the federal government to take action. So it'd just be really interesting to hear Arron's reflection on that.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And it's such a difficult one, because I completely agree with you that when you come down to it, if we don't have the housing options there, it's so difficult to even take that first step. For those of you who aren't in Victoria, our state government just announced essentially a retrofit and a refurb for thousands of social housing homes, but there was only 168 new homes announced as part of that. And we know already in the city of Melbourne, just today, we're 5,500 homes short in terms of affordable housing, and that's both affordable and the social sort of community and social housing. But, you know, 5,500 people that, you know, 5,500 homes that we need just in the city of Melbourne alone. I think for me though, there's been a slow kind of thawing of the ice, I guess, if you like, with the state government. You know, the $2 billion social housing fund is starting to place some homes. So there's sort of some green shoots. It's not happening quick enough. But I think the other voice that's really important here is the capital city Lord Mayors are quite powerful, because they're home to, you know, a huge amount of the population, and the economic engine rooms of our country are all demanding from state government and federal government that action is taken. Again, I'm not going to say that it's going to solve everything overnight, but I just feel like, you know, combined with things like filthy rich and homeless, combined with the fact that I walk down the street and it's the single issue that every single person approaches me on is about what are we doing for our people experiencing homelessness. So I just think that the problem is there that in this century, this is the most damning statistic, in this century, we've actually seen a decline in the number of social homes, not an increase, but a decline. There was for many years this understanding that we built social housing. It was part of what we did. All people needed access to housing, and then something changed, and successive governments haven't woken up to that. But I just feel like, if we don't take action now, San Francisco had a couple of hundred people on the streets, a few years back, and then it went to 2,000, and then it went to 5,000, and then it went to 15,000. I'm going to do everything I can. I'm one voice, but I've got a bit of clout, and I think the sector is becoming more and more joined up in the way we advocate together. So I'm not, again, saying it's going to be solved overnight, but I feel like there's been almost no time like the present with this COVID crisis that we just demand action. And ultimately the federal government is going to have to come with us, or, they're beholden to the vote.
Yeah, I'm mindful that we're now 3 minutes to time, so I'm going to. I have a million questions. I know there's a bunch more we have on stack still as well, but unfortunately we won't probably be able to get to them today. So one thing we've done that I've really enjoyed as well is at the end of these sessions, there's so much to feel frustrated about and so much to feel kind of down about in the world at the moment, that it's nice to end by saying, what is something that the three of you have seen this week that's made you kind of smile, that's made you feel grateful or happy? I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that while I just do some wrap up stuff. So firstly, I just wanted to say thank you to all three of you for joining. So Skye, Jacob and Arron, thank you so much for joining us today and for pulling this program together. I guess I extend that to Catherine as well. I think it's a really powerful program that plays a really important role in our national debate, which I'm grateful to know exists. I also just wanted to say thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us as well. I think it's been a really, really robust discussion with lots of thoughts and contributions, and I think it's been really, really interesting for me and hopefully for you all as well. Do check out what we've got coming up next week. There's lots of programs coming up. I've lost my little list. But yeah, if you go to australiathome.com.au, you can see all the things we've got planned for next week, including the usual, weekly Geek Fest with Catherine Murphy and Peter Lewis as they chew over all of the things that have happened in politics in the week previous. We've got a really interesting session about workplace surveillance and the future of work, and the Guardian Book Club on Friday, which was extremely popular last month, and I think will continue rolling along. So go check those things out and join them. Watch any of the previous ones. There's actually a pretty substantial back catalogue now, which is nice. But before we wrap up, I'll come back to you all and say, so perhaps, Arron, what is something that has made you smile or feel really, really good this week?
I was hoping you were going to give me more time there, Daniel. I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here because it's probably not something that I've walked past today, but I think you're right. You always need to leave with a little bit of sense of hope. And on our, what we call the Munro site, which is near Queen Victoria Market, City of Melbourne committed to 57 affordable housing units. And that's what a local government can do if it chooses to make a difference. And it's not going to solve the thousands of homes that we need, but 57 homes there, 50 homes somewhere else, 10 homes here, a big social housing build. Who knows what we can achieve?
Absolutely. What about you, Skye?
Look, so many things make me happy. I suppose in this world gone mad with COVID and what's happening in America, there are silver linings in these clouds. And I feel, knowing that I was doing this interview today, I've had my two sons and my husband with me here. We haven't been together like this for many, many years. And that we watched a rerun of my series. And it was really fascinating to watch it again with them. And 2 years on, their minds, because they're young, asking me more and more questions and wanting them to get more involved in what is happening out there in our world. So that's been a nice thing to do with them this week.
Oh, that's a great story. Jacob, what about yourself?
Well, that's easy because it's Skye's story that's just made me happy. But yeah, I also think, I'll be honest, seeing the promos go out for the show and knowing that for 3 nights next week, Australia's eyes will and hopefully their hearts and minds will be on homelessness. And I think that's a rare privilege to be involved in something like that. And I just hope it makes any difference it can. But listening to these two guys today, it strikes me that it might.
Yeah, congratulations for your work doing it as well. I think that often gets unacknowledged. I think we talked a little bit about the production process today, but it's not lost on me how much of a mammoth undertaking it must have been, and we're grateful for the contribution you've made to everything that we'll be thinking about over the next week.
One day I'll get a proper job, but thank you.
Don't bother. We like you the way you are.
Exactly. All right, awesome. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Okay.
Cheers. Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.